Alright, quick video. This is my 2001 Subaru. This will be kind of probably a piecemeal of videos as I work through and replace my steering rack. I've got another video, which I don't know if I'll post or not, but it has where I was able to pick up the car. I was having the symptoms were wobbly steering and it would kind of catch. And just didn't sound right, even at a stop sometimes in a parking lot. And I was hoping it was just another wheel bearing. These are pressed in, which I have a press for, and okay, not too big a deal, but turns out it was the steering rack. So I don't know if it'll show, but this is the bad one. You can see that I'm able to move, or at least maybe here I'm able to move that. You can see the boot's torn. There's fluid coming out. That's not supposed to happen. So anyway, there's a plate right under here to remove. There's a tie rod ends. Pop the tie rod ends off. I may end up just replacing them while I got everything off. Just thought I'd show one of the best tools I've found to do this, aside from, I mean, a pickle fork works, but you always end up tearing your boot. I've tried a number of different methods, and this by far, ball joint separator, is the best way I've found. So this guy kind of slides in like so, and then you're able to exert downforce with this top finger right there and pop these things loose. So anyway, I'm working on this side. There's a steering bolt back in here to get out. I don't know if the camera will show it, but give a socket on it there to unbolt the U-joint from. This is the new rack right here. And then there's a set of hoses that is clamped around on the other side. I think it looks like I can take them off. Sorry for bad camera work if there is any. So down around this side, you can kind of see those two guys right. Sorry, it's right there and there. Let's see if it'll refocus. So I'm gonna undo those lines, and I should be able to drop the whole thing. I hope I don't have to take my exhaust off. I hope I have enough wiggle room to get it out without doing that, although I will find out shortly. And then I've also got a new pump to put on. And I have a set of hoses, but I don't have all of them. For some reason, some of the hoses were ridiculously expensive, and I could probably because they're pre-molded, like this hose right here, I think was $100-something. And granted, normally if you were to do something like this, your best sort of method is to replace everything, right? Here's the problem. I just put $2,500 into this Subaru a year ago, a little over a year ago, year and a half. I had to replace the whole rear subframe, and what that entailed was subframe, trailing arms, brakes, link arms, CV axles, ABS sensors, literally replace the entire rear end. That was $2,500 in parts, in my time and my labor to get it done. The car has 200,000 miles on it. Yes, for longevity's sake, you should replace everything if something like this happens. But I think I'm gonna check out the condition of the hoses, and pretty much I'm gonna put one of these on, a filter for the low pressure line. I'm gonna bleed it out as best I can. And odds are, with this vehicle, I'm playing the odds here, I'm gonna have something else major go wrong before the power steering fails again. So just given the miles and the condition of the vehicle and the rust and everything else. So I think that's what I'm gonna do. I may change my mind midway, we'll see. See how it goes. I'll kind of piece together a few videos as I go, just in case somebody else runs into the same thing. All right, so mid-process update, just so you can kind of see what's going on. You can see the one dripping there, the fitting dripping there. That one came off pretty easily. The one next to it, let's see if I can point. It's kind of hard to. That one, the one my finger's covering, was not so easy. I ended up having to get a wrench on the coupler and a wrench on the fitting itself to get it to turn. It was kind of stuck on there. What I suggest, if you're not familiar with them, is that you utilize line wrenches. These things are for brake lines, for any kind of line that has a hard fitting like that. These will make your life much easier. They will keep you from stripping and stripping the bolt off of or the nut rather off of the line fitting head and having a bad day trying to replace the whole thing. So I would highly suggest these. They're cheap. They usually come in a set. I use them anytime I work on brakes or anytime I work on anything with a fitting like that. Make your life easier. Also, before, state the obvious, before I did any of this, I cleaned it up, the fittings, and as best I could. It's kind of hard to get down in there. And sprayed some, I personally prefer Aerocroil. There's a bunch of stuff out there. This is actually Silicroil, which is Aerocroil plus silicone. I don't know, it works for me. The other thing that I decided to do is trip over stuff. I decided to tie my steering wheel in place. As I started undoing the bolt for the steering knuckle, I kind of started thinking about alignment and what it's going to look like putting a new rack on there. So what I decided to do, I've kind of tied the steering wheel in place, it's centered, and what I'll do is I've marked kind of where the steering shaft is, and then really, because it's a whole new one, I think what I'm going to do is it should be the same distance from here to here on both ends. So I'll just get my tape out, center it up as best I can, pop it in, and then that's why you have all those threads to be able to adjust. But you still want to get it as close as you can. Anyway, I'll be back as I keep going. So the next thing I'm going to do, now that I've got the lines disconnected up on the back side of the engine there, those same lines are what wraps around right here. So those go up and connect, and this whole thing should, from looking at it, I believe the whole thing will drop down with the steering rack, and then I can swap it over out of the vehicle onto the new one and then put it back up. So I've got the steering bolt out for the little knuckle. It's just a single bolt. I've got the tie rod ends popped off, and I'm about to undo. It might be kind of hard to see. Let's see. There's one right there where my finger just was. There's two brackets. There's one right there, and there's another one right up here. We'll undo those and see if we can drop this thing without dropping the exhaust. Worst case, I maybe just unbolt the exhaust here at the head. I've had to replace this whole exhaust just last year. You see how rusty this stuff already is. It's annoying. It's the brine they put on the roads up here where I live. It's pretty awful on the car. So anyway, I'll send an update as I start to drop this thing. All right, quick update as I'm going along. You can see I got the bolts out. I used a little pry bar and up against the sway bar, which is that I'm kind of shining the light on it there. It's kind of hard to see, but just to kind of pull it down. And you can kind of see I was able to, just doing that, once I loosened the knuckle earlier, it just sort of comes off. At least mine did. I also sprayed it with some penetrating fluid before. You can see there's, well, I can't turn the wheel, but on the other side of this, there's a gap that you can actually see the threads for the knuckle there, and for the steering rack. You can get a little penetrating fluid in there. It'll probably help, like mine, slide it off, because you can see it's kind of caked in crud and everything else. I will say I used I've got a impact wrench that I'm using to take these steering rack bolts off after what, 16, 17 years, 18 years, and 200,000 miles. They did not want to let go. So mine were difficult to get out, but the impact took them out. It just, it took a tank or two of air. I just have a smaller compressor, but anyway, we'll keep going. We'll see if we can get this thing out without dropping the exhaust. Okay, another quick update. I ran into a problem with the sway bar on this one, hitting the brake lines. It wouldn't let it drop far enough. You can see how that one's kind of hanging over, and that's even after what I had to do was disconnect. I didn't disconnect it at the spindles. I went ahead and disconnected it here, and over here at the mounting, at the sort of mid bushing, whatever you want to call that. And I did end up having to drop the exhaust. Now the advantage for me was, since I think I mentioned, I just replaced all the exhaust about 1.5 years ago. It wasn't that big a deal. I replaced actually most of the studs at the same time I did that. You can actually buy the studs from Subaru or some other places and replace them. You can see though, even still, sometimes the stud wants to come out versus the nut coming off. But anyway, you can kind of see now that I've dropped the exhaust a little bit. I didn't end up doing anything else to the exhaust, just disconnecting both of those, both of the headers from the exhaust manifold. Is enough to drop down, and it looks like I can, those hoses are clear now. The steering coupler's almost clear. It looks like I can kind of wiggle this on out, so hopefully that works. All right, just a quick update. I got the old lines off. They were definitely a bit of a bear to get off without stripping. A lot of junk builds up in the fittings, a little bit of heat and brake cleaner and brushing and aerocroil, and they're off. And they're attached to the new one. I went ahead, like I said before, I put a lot of money into this vehicle recently, and normally, this sort of goes against how I would normally do things, but normally I'd be replacing this whole hose assembly, but I just don't, you kind of hit a point and it's not worth investing new parts into a vehicle that I don't think is going to last that much longer, but it's still worth it to get it on the road for another year or 2 or 3. But anyway, so basically just blew them all out with cleaned them all out with brake cleaner. I ran about a half can or more through each line, and blew it out with some compressed air. And the other little thing that I did is added a filter. The one I got, I assume it's the right one. It is now. It was a 5/8. This is the only 5/8 hose on here, which is from the reservoir up to the pump to feed the pump. I feel like typically, although I've never put one of these on, is it would actually come on the return line here. But in this case, the way I see it, that's gonna have the same result. Don't think it'll starve the pump of any fluid or anything, so there it is. And if I'm wrong, well, it's right here and I'll change it. Yeah, so there we go. So now comes trying to, we'll finagle the rack back in and get it bolted up and go from there. All right, so steering rack is in. Just look for the shiny bits here. You can kind of see it tucked up in there. I really, actually, bolting the thing up was not too bad. The hardest part was getting the steering knuckle back on for me. I ended up having to force its a little pinch joint. Had to maneuver it so that it could be up against something solid, otherwise it flops around, and basically hammer a screwdriver into it to widen it a little bit. And then with the steering wheel tied down, centered, was able to had to just wiggle it back and forth to get it to go in. It was kind of a pain, actually, more so than I thought. And then up top, grab a light. Up top, I got these are connected, the hoses down here in the bottom. I ended up having, I struggled with it for a little bit. I got one in, and sometimes brake fittings, these kind of lines are hard to get started. And so I undid the little bolt that you can see there that holds the hoses together. As soon as I did that, I was able to get it in just fine. So that part is done, and on to actually changing out the pump now, and I'll probably do a separate video post on that depending how long this one ends up being. So there you go, not too bad. Kind of a pain to get it back on, but oh yeah, and don't forget, like I did, to take the brackets off the old pump, because if you forget, the lines that you swap over go over that bracket. So I had to pull it back out, take the brackets off, or take the lines off, put the brackets on, put it back in. So not too big a deal, but there you go.